Hello, listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of the AdQuick Advertising Podcast, a podcast that explores the intersection of technology, marketing, culture, all of the things that you care about. Today, we have a special guest. We have Tom Shea. He is the co-founder and chief revenue officer of Adgile Media Group, which brings a wealth of experience in out-of-home advertising, particularly with their innovative truck advertising model, which we're going to get into a lot about. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ed. I'm excited to be on the advertising pod and excited to dive in.
Awesome. And so we should just start. I think this is helpful just for getting context. Do you want to share a little bit about Adgile and maybe even a little bit about your story and how the company came to be?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I'll quickly talk about Adgile first. So Adgile Media Group, we turn last mile delivery trucks traveling the densest urban areas into mobile billboards on behalf of consumer brands. I think there's two things that make it interesting. The first is a happy accident. When we started the business, we took business from all categories, didn't care if it was B2B or consumer. But today we're consumer specialists, and people ask me why that is. We thought people were buying us because of the price point or because of the cool technology we'll dive into. But when we saw outsized return and retention from folks operating in the consumer category, we went to them and said, listen, this is weird. This is new. We're sort of the only guys doing this. Yet you keep coming back to us year after year. Why is that? What they said was interesting. They said, Tom, we like this form of advertising because it's the only form of advertising no one knows is advertising. And so we sat on that for a while, and that ultimately led to a long-form behavioral psychology study we commissioned that revealed 96.3% of people who see a branded truck believe that truck is delivering product on behalf of the advertised for brand, whether that is true or not. So people were seeing these and going, oh, crap. I guess the presence of all of these vehicles must suggest that all of my neighbors and peers are ordering from that brand. And that was actually showing up in the performance data, more importantly. And so that became our wedge at the intersection of out-of-home and consumer, something we really leaned into. Today, we operate in about 50 cities across North America, support a little under 500 or so consumer brands. The other part, which I'm sure we'll dive into, is just the technology. There's an interesting tech stack component, as is very true of the broader out-of-home landscape these days, that allows us to attribute offline media exposures to online, in-store, or in-app purchase events. So that's the quick little ditty on Adgile. Happy to dive into my story if that's helpful.
Yeah, but it's technically correct for like any sort of CPG good. It is delivered on a truck somewhere. So it's not a lie, even if the specific product isn't in that truck, the product's getting delivered in a truck. So
Totally.
if it's not like a gym or something, unless maybe people actually think like there's gym equipment in the truck.
Totally. I mean, it's consumer goods and services is really our bread and butter. And granted, there's always exceptions to the rule. We have plenty of business that are outside of the consumer industry, but we don't pretend to be something we're not. We try to lean in where we think we can be most accretive. And so we found a fun little home and consumer. But you're right. Like our business model is predicated on like the shoulders of Amazon and alcohol distributors that have wrapped their trucks for so long. Has created this really interesting behavioral psychology play that's allowed us to, build a pretty cool little category.
And another interesting thing, when you mention it's seen as organic, something that we've noted at AdQuick is out-of-home ads are really the only ad format that users actually document with their phones and share with their networks online every day. And it feels organic to them. It's part of their landscape. It's not like an ad on your phone when you're browsing a social network or an ad when you're, watching a show with your family that's interrupting the experience.
Totally.
Because it's not interrupting anything. And I think that goes to show you consumers, if something's creative or interesting, they'll be interested in it, especially if it's not. I think like the closer it is to a personal piece of media you're consuming, the more annoying it is.
Sure.
And sure, they might convert, whatever percent, but I think you're annoying all of the users who didn't want that ad at that moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one thing that we've also just learned as part of the journey is the trust factor. I mean, when people are like, oh, that brand exists in my market. That's not just some like random third-party drop shipping brand. And I don't know if I trust the manufacturers or the materials. They're going, oh, like that company does business in this area. They're established. They're trustworthy. And all things that I think we've learned along the way. I'd love to pretend we went into it with this master plan of like, it's going to work because of X, Y, Z. But, we've just stayed open-minded and adjusted our strategy as we've learned more about the why and the how people want to buy this format.
And so to talk about your story a little bit, you
Sure.
met your co-founder Max Flannery while pursuing your MBA at the University of Chicago. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So backing up a little bit, I come from a pretty large family, son of a firefighter and a school teacher. And while my dad was a firefighter, he started a sign shop on Long Island in New York. It's called Mineola Signs. So I grew up with some exposure to it. But then I went to school in Boston. First job out of college moved me to Los Angeles. And while I was at that company, it's called McMaster Car Supply Company. I always tell people it's Amazon.com, but Home Depot products. So like screws, nuts, bolts, big distributor. Eventually, they'd moved me to headquarters, which was based out of Chicago, to join the software team there. And as soon as I had moved, a few things happened in my life. I met my now wife, Hannah. I met my now co-founder, Max Flannery, through friends of friends, and I enrolled at the University of Chicago for a nights and weekends MBA. So I was working full-time and then doing the MBA program at night. And, I think I always get asked, was the MBA worth it? I think going into it, wanting to start a company, it was, simply because we were able to use all of the coursework and all of the great, like, diverse perspectives from our classmates to analyze the same business case over and over through all that coursework. And so I think we were much better because of that experience. And eventually we spun it out and got it to a point where we could quit our jobs and go full time on it.
Yeah, I think what you say is true. I was reading a stat today that MBAs are having a hard time finding jobs. And it dawned on me, I'm like, if you went through the effort to get an MBA and you couldn't find a job, why don't you start a company right now? There's so much to do.
Totally.
You've been trained in all of the areas of a business at that point. Like why keep pursuing the corporate ladder? Why not? If you're someone listening to this and you have an MBA, why not start a small business or raise some venture if you've got a big ambitious idea? Like there's fewer and fewer things stopping people, particularly as AI is making it so easy for everyone to do, most of the basic coding things. Anyone can figure it out. Honestly, it's not that hard.
Right.
So
yeah, no, I agree. I have a little bit of a hot take. I think we are on the precipice of like one of the largest entrepreneurial booms we've ever experienced. And I think the reason for that is, if all of these MBAs, and honestly, a lot of these computer science students that are now trying to find jobs that are being automated away by AI, if they need to find an opportunity, they're going to start working on a bunch of side projects. We'll call them resume builders. And a bunch of them are going to accidentally stumble into entrepreneurship when that side project turns into something that's truly monetizable and something that creates value for some segment of society. And, it's, instead of the story being like, yeah, I really want to start a company, I think we're going to have a bunch of people that literally just accidentally end up starting companies. And I think it's going to be pretty cool to see.
Yeah. And if you think of the classic stopping point of so many entrepreneurs, it's, exactly what it is. I couldn't find a technical co-founder. It's like the most common thing that I hear from people. And now the AI or like the entire ecosystem of startups that exist just to do the kind of common things that you would have to do with technology for a startup, it's kind of taking all of the sort of reasons why you might be afraid to start a company off the table.
Adam, is the only way to win going to be marketing then? If that's been abstracted away, is that where we're getting?
Well, marketers have their own challenges. I like to say if they automate all of the marketing jobs away, actually every marketer will have to become an influencer, YouTuber, podcaster, email distribution list, something like that. And I actually think as a marketer, you should have some project on your own. You were talking about side projects, whether it's, a blog or a newsletter, or even just like a small e-commerce store or some project you built that you went through all of the steps yourself. It doesn't have to make millions of dollars, but I think when you go through that yourself, you understand all the aspects of, especially like an e-commerce type business. And that way you're not just running ads. Running ads is great. If you can make great ads, that's obviously a really important skill. But I think marketers should also be aware of all of the other aspects that go into converting the user, that go into the sale, that go into the customer service after, because ultimately you could be in a situation where, yeah, your ads are great and you're bringing in a bunch of users and they're just not retaining for some reason, or they're attritioning later on, or you're doing something else in the company that's sort of putting them off. And then it's like all that effort that you went in, because it's hard to acquire users, is just, it just goes away.
I agree. I mean, I think one part of it's just empathy building, but I think the more important component is also like, let's just use out of home. You can't be good at out of home without a pretty intimate understanding of the opportunity cost of a counterparty's decision to do business with you. Like where else could that money be spent? Where, what's going on with linear, what's going on with CTV, what's going on with these influencer models? You need to really understand those. You can't just be like, hey, I'm going to just only think about out of home, because it's only one part of the mix or the stack. And, there's a lot of decisions before people. You have to know when, why, and how this is the better decision over all of those other options.
Yeah. Out of home typically is bought by, I would say, more sophisticated advertisers. You have to have a large enough budget for it to make sense.
Right.
So historically, although this may change soon with some things that we're working on, historically out of home is for, marketing teams that are consummate professionals, not necessarily like, the 2-person startup. Although I would like us to get to the point that technology is good enough so the 2-person startup can run out of home pretty efficiently and easily. And I think we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our experience has been pretty early stage. Might be a price point consideration. It also just might be, we talked about understanding what the counterparty is going through and the different options. We've had a lot of success with just founder-led sales selling into other emerging brands, because we get it, and we're pretty careful about when, where, and like what parameters must be in place before we feel comfortable taking the business to make sure it's a high percentage shot, and like at what thresholds it becomes more accretive. But there's no question it's rapidly changing, and it's been a pretty exciting time to see it enter the mix for a lot of those early stage brands.
So, Tom, you have really interesting technology at your startup. Do you want to explain it in plain English, not for engineers, but for the marketer, for the advertiser?
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said, we turn last mile delivery trucks traveling the densest urban areas into mobile billboards. All assets that we have under management have a GPS within them. And that GPS has a callable API that gives us latitude, longitude, and timestamp every second. So we know where the vehicle is. We essentially are hitting that API and using software to draw a geofence around it every second. So you can picture almost like a circle around the truck that's constantly updating in real time as the truck's moving. And it's capturing people's mobile phones that have location services enabled on a variety of mobile applications. So like think dating apps, weather apps, navigation apps, things like that. And then once you capture someone's mobile phone, there's a lot you can do with it. You can ID stitch to their other devices, so their desktop, tablet, connected TV, etc., which is helpful for solving for platform promiscuity. People might be exposed and captured by way of their mobile phone, but make a purchase decision at home on their desktop or tell their partner about it during dinner. You can resolve to the exposed audience demographics and psychographics, which is most useful pre-campaign. These are fixed stop assets, so they have pretty predictable routes. And so, different assets are good for different business cases, depending on what type of consumer that person is trying to optimize for. You can hit them with retargeting ads. So in the same way that ads have followed you around for the past 10 years online, you can bridge the gap from offline to online. And then lastly, and most importantly, is in the context of attribution. You can follow that consumer to an e-commerce business by placing pixels. You can follow them to a brick and mortar location by drawing geofences. You can follow them to an app download or subsequent activity on a mobile app through integrations with MMP providers. And so it's not your mother's out of home. And, when we were getting started, this was pretty novel. But, I'd say it's more commonplace and out of home. And I'm big on the idea that the tech is there. If a media owner is not using it, it's always worth questioning or asking the question as to why. Maybe there's good reasons, but I think this accountability and transparency for the industry has been a huge net positive. And we've tried to keep that at the forefront. I always go back to Facebook isn't winning on market share for ad spend because they have good salespeople. It's winning because the thing just objectively works and it's indisputable, right? And so our role and our job is to build in that same direction. Like a lot of out of home today still trades on the basis of relationships. But if you think about future proofing the business, I think building around this idea of performance and transparency, I don't know over what time scale, it will be the thing that is the future of how media dollars trade hands in our industry.
Yeah, it's becoming less and less that any ad buys people make are outside of an ad tech like you or us or any of like a Google or a Facebook, because the platforms want you to have there's like a expected suite of tools that everyone is used to, and I think this is forcing all of the tech providers to do a really good job to make sure that the creative is formatted right, it's scaled out to all of the right users, there's analytics, and it's all trackable, and they're able to be accountable. And I think like the bar has sort of been set.
Yeah.
And I think like even for my own marketing, it's like pretty rare that I'll sponsor someone outside of like a network. Even like for email marketing, I use a tool called Beehive. And the reason is just simple. It's scale. It's like, yeah, I can sponsor one newsletter that reaches however many people, or I can use this platform to reach, thousands, if not tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of newsletters, and, do so in just a way that scales. And
Yeah.
I guess it depends. If you're like just a small lifestyle business, you don't think like that. But I think anyone who's serious about growing $1 billion brand is always thinking about scale. So
yeah,
it's just where the world is going.
And you can't measure, or you can't manage what you can't measure, or you can't manage what you can't measure. Got to make sure I got that correctly. Right. So like, I think whether or not you nailed on the first shot, you do need some sort of data to inform, am I getting better at this over time? Which I think is the most important variable, if nothing else. And so I agree. Any service that has those analytics sets you up or puts you in a position where you can continue to learn and grow and improve over time, and make sure that with each additional dollar being spent, we're learning something that can inform the future state of our strategy.
So I'm very bullish what you're doing, obviously, because we're doing something similar at AdQuick. But I feel like in a lot of ways, this is kind of the more interesting side of technology, are companies that create software that interfaces with the real world. And obviously Uber and Airbnb are examples on the consumer side. But on the B2B side, I'm really excited because basically I think like we've almost over-indexed on ad tech, on just like pure digital world things. And I don't think it's a bubble. I just think like if you were to create another startup there, what do you want to be, like the 100th A/B testing company or like the 1,000th attribution company? And it's just like, and I still see a lot of companies in this space get funded, okay, this time it's powered by AI. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but every other startup, every other ad tech that exists is going to be powered by AI and use the same things. So I feel like the most interesting space are, what you're doing with out of home, what a company called Lob is doing with direct mail, where they're trying to take, direct mail and turn it into a digital first experience for the marketer.
Right.
I'm curious, do you feel the same way? Or I guess what else other than physical and digital world excites you about ad tech right now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting when we were raising capital and people heard about the technology and the attribution component, everyone wanted us to be a SaaS company. And I get it, right? Like the multiples might be more attractive, or they are more attractive, full stop. But, I felt the same way. I was like, there are so many companies chasing that part of the market. And my response to the venture community was like, don't invest in this company if you want me to be a SaaS company, because Tom Shea doesn't think he can win that game, but I do think I can win this game. And so, our business, we came up in the industry together more or less, but we sort of looked at the white space opportunity as like investing in Williamsburg before Williamsburg got cool. There's a finite there's scarcity of supply, right? This is physical world stuff. There's inherently some level of scarcity. And so people who can control the ownership of the supply are the ones that stand to benefit. And to your guys' credit, you have taken all the folks like us and made something that's been miserably fragmented for so long and unified it as one solution where you can view everything. And so, I love the AdQuick model. I think it's genius. But, it wasn't a space where I thought we would win because we saw you guys doing so well there. And so we went really focused on the supply side, and we were looking to our left, and you had like Firefly and then Uber and Lyft entering the space for random route assets, taxis in a market. You have the vector medias of the world with these fixed route assets. They have to go on the same square, both very, very big markets, healthy businesses. And no one was really playing in this messy middle that I call fixed stop assets. So they got to get to the same place. So it's a fairly predictable route, but there can be some variance, which I think sits squarely in the middle. And so that was the part that we set out to create. I think what got us so excited about it was on the surface, it looked just like the out-of-home industry, right? The average operator has 1 to 5 trucks in his or her fleet. That's 89% of the market for our supply side, right? That's miserable. Like, you got to talk to every mom and pop operator to try to stitch this together. But what we learned is while operations is very fragmented, the underlying ownership is very consolidated to a handful of players. And those are your leasing companies, your Penske's, Riders, National Leases of the world. And they actually own the title on those assets, and they're just leasing them out. And so the part that got really exciting, and I think the thing that makes us so excited about our go-to-market, was that realization. And we've leaned on those supply side aggregators to help us scale quickly across the country. Instead of having to guess and check with all of these operators, you have a partner that can actually tell you, hey, we control most of the market. Here's all the different routes. Why don't you simulate them using your technology to understand which ones are most performant or desirable for advertisers? And so that's really how we've stitched it together. So maybe that's not directly answering your question, but that was the part that got us so excited because we just kept learning more and more things as we kept getting deeper and deeper. And we're cautious of confirmation bias, but a lot of things were just confirmatory, and it kept getting more exciting as we got deeper and deeper.
No, that does answer my question. And so one thing you've said, and I hope I'm not misquoting this, is I credit our success to staying in the ring long enough.
Yeah.
And so I guess regarding that question, it's so interesting because I've actually, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have had the reverse problem. Like, I've held on to like investments longer than I should have, and I
Right.
probably should have cut. But of course, success comes from pushing through. How do you think entrepreneurs like yourself should think about, when should I just really hold on, power through? And maybe what are some signals, hey, this isn't working, we should pivot, try something else?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the reason I like that statement has to do with our origin story. So Max and I kept our full-time jobs for the first 2.5 years, and we were working on a fundamentally different business model. So instead of static wraps, it was digital screens, and it was a really, really complicated business. And, it's something we learned while at UChicago that ultimately led us to pivot. But had we quit our jobs and said, hey, we're so excited about this idea, we're dropping everything and going to focus on it, we would have run out of money because we didn't have any money coming in, right? We would be unemployed at that point. And because we kept our jobs and spent so much time de-risking it, there was an opportunity where a pivot was permissible. And it wasn't like hey, let's hang up our hats and go to the Big Four and get consulting jobs. It allowed us to continue to chase that business idea. So I think entrepreneurship inherently has a little bit of a marketing problem in that it's deemed so risky. I think our approach to it was pretty methodical and low risk. I'm not like a high risk person. I'm actually very risk averse, I think. So I do credit us just, continuing to stay with it and learning more things, gave it another chance to reinvent itself and land on something that actually had product market fit. But to the other end, I mean, staying with it to all like those, there was a completely separate reality where we stayed with it long enough to know that it wasn't the right idea to move forward with. And I don't know exactly what the cues are, but I think when you see them. Like we were getting good feedback when we switched the model, and so it was okay. Let's continue to stick with this a little bit, and we kept learning more and more. But maybe it could have gone the other way, and so I get it's a hard. Unfortunately, hindsight's always 2020, and it's easy to look back and string this perfect narrative of how everything worked together and it all made sense the entire time. But when you're in it, you have no idea what's going on. Is the actual reality. Surround yourself with people who are way smarter than you. Know what you don't know. Find people that do know, and lean on their expertise to help you try to make that decision. Is probably how I'd approach it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the same muscle that lets you power through and win can also just keep you running with a bad idea. And a lot
Totally.
of founders who pivot successful are like, man, I should have done that sooner. And I think it's like, to your point, maybe talk to mentors and people who have been there, done that, and try to make an informed decision. So you have a lot of really cool brands: Glossier, Tropicals, Gia. A lot of really hit brands have flocked to you guys. What do you think makes out-of-home trucks such a slam dunk for like the specific companies that end up coming back to you again and again?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a few things at play. One, a lot of those brands, when we're partnering with them, they're for the first time ever going D2C to omnichannel as a strategy. And, we all lived through it. I think there was a world where people thought D2C was an entire strategy. And we've learned in the modern era, it's a channel. And a lot of the money is still being made in retail. And so, when we were working with those brands, there's a few challenges they have. One, it's a lot of different locations they need to support with like fairly limited resources. And so I think one big attractive component to what we were able to offer is, hey, you're in these 11 Whole Foods in New York. Well, if you're thinking out of home, maybe there's some that you can get directly adjacent, but we are able to support a very wide number of points of distribution with a fairly inexpensive buy. And so I think that one was pretty important. I think the other thing is going back to just like going from D2C only and omnichannel. The Facebook pixel is always going to be better at finding people who index well to the brand and inherently shop online, because that's success metric is what all of those machine learning lookalike algorithms are going to constantly recalibrate against. What it's not so great at is finding people who index well to the brand and inherently shop in store. And so, if you put yourself in the shoes of those founders, the whole script is being flipped. Everything you knew and everything that got you to where you were or where you are was no longer the strategy that you could take going forward. And so you start looking at the other options. And so, a combination of things: accessibility of price point, being able to support a large number of doors with a fairly inexpensive buy. And then the last thing that's newer but's really caught on, and I think people like, is this what I would call experiential light. So like we're able to take these assets off the road mid-cycle, deploy them in support of a sampling event in front of a retailer, or go hand deliver PR packages to influencers, or do interview on the street series. And content is king. Everyone's looking for ways to create more content. And this is something that checked a lot of boxes and had that as a nice little add-on. And then obviously the thing that I think matters the most, or the thing that gets most people excited, is proof of performance, measurement, attribution, and understanding of, did this work or did it not? Our job is not to be salesy, it's to be the objective arbiters of truth. And so, I view our role as, here's the data. Your job as the founder is to make the most informed decision based on the data. And so compare this across channels, try to understand what is most efficacious. And if it's agile, we'll continue to expand that relationship and do business. Also, the thing I'm probably discounting a little bit is we're impressionable individuals. As we've grown the business, it's gotten easier to grow the business because the social proof stacks on top of itself. And people are looking to their peer group to de-risk things for them to a degree. And I think, we've done a good job of, one, attracting a very specific type of consumer, CPG founders, CPG businesses, and building a case and a story and a bunch of case studies around why they should do business with us.
I love the example you gave of the experiential marketing, like, going to an influencer event with a truck. I think is super smart. And also like tastings, I think are really smart too. Like how fun to, if you have a big product launch, to actually get that in the hands of people and you make it an experience. It's like you're creating a moment in time for people where it could be expected or unexpected. And I think every time marketers do that, it's just cool. I think people crave that. I think people want to, like, whatever you can do to actually have your brand be a part of someone's day,
Totally.
whether it's seeing the truck or even getting to try the product. Like you're doing something different than just seeing another display ad or YouTube pre-roll. It's like, as Seth Godin would say, it's something remarkable, as in you would remark on it.
Totally.
And I think the fact that now there's software that actually makes it pretty easy to do it. Like we're kind of making things that historically like would take, weeks or months of planning. Now you could just, call your team or our team and have it sort of done for you, at least like a lot of the hard parts. So I think marketers should, it's cool. It actually makes sense that you have these cool D2C brands going to you, because they're the ones who try every single new thing to see what works. And they're sort of like a bit ambitious and a bit, they have to be, right. They're trying to disrupt a big consumer good company that's kind of rested on their laurels. Right. And so they didn't get there by not trying stuff out and taking advantage of technology.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think we've made it palatable from a budget perspective, and that's really helped adoption. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we've commodified the digital experience. It's so easy to exist only online. I think when communities and consumers see stuff in the real world, it leaves a pretty big impact on the associative properties they're creating with that brand.
Totally. So, Tom, for the I guess the startups or companies who are like that under allocate to out of home, or maybe are a little gun shy, like what do you tell them that's like the most effective persuasion? And I asked this for the marketer sitting in our audience saying, I want to do more out of home. Like what should they tell their boss that is the most persuasive?
Yeah, that's fair. I think, and we didn't always have this information, but something that's been super valuable both to Adgile and our counterparties, our brand partners, is building guidelines and following the data to inform guidelines around when this starts to feel most accretive. And I'm going to say where we draw the line. I think I want to be pretty clear. This is very specific to our format and our types of businesses that we work with. I don't want to scare too many people away, but like if you take the digital first, D2C first brand, let's like use an Athletic Greens predominantly sold on the internet. We wait till the brand has 5,000 daily website visitors or greater before we feel comfortable taking the business. If it is a low AOV retail first brand, think like a consumable, like a soda of sorts, we wait till they have 25 points of purchase in the market that we're activating in or greater before we feel comfortable taking the business. And if it is a high AOV brand, think like a Sephora brand, cosmetics, things like that, we wait till they have at least 10 points of purchase in the market that we're activating in before we feel comfortable taking the business. And so I think the most effective persuasion has been data. And the data tells an interesting story. And honestly, it helps us because there's no one wins if the campaign underperforms. Like no one's happy. Like, yeah, maybe money traded hands, but this isn't really a business where you can churn and burn and be successful. Like the business is built on trust and long-term relationships. And the only way to get that and keep that is being pretty forthcoming about when you don't think it's a good fit. And, like I said, we didn't always have that data, and that data is always constantly evolving. And there's always exceptions to the rule. Sometimes brands use us for a launch. It's a great strategy to create buzz and stuff like that. You don't have any website traffic yet. Is it a bad idea? Not necessarily. But, I think having something for people to sink their teeth into that has actual context and history behind it has been the most efficacious thing in terms of getting people comfortable or telling them, I don't think now's the right time, but they appreciate that you're forthcoming with that. And when it is the right time, they're probably going to give you a call because they appreciated you weren't trying to just take their money for some short-term mindset that you were after, things like that.
No, I think that's great that you know the ideal user for your product. Since you've done this enough times, you're like, hey, for example, the number of locations should be this for it to be, a really successful campaign. We don't want to drive up a bunch of interest and then they don't know where to go, right?
There's no at-bats. Yeah, totally.
No, that totally makes sense. So Tom, you once explored digital screens on trucks. We talked about that previously.
Yeah.
Is there any chance we'll see you guys do digital out of home again?
It's a good question. So to back up a little bit, we put static vinyl wraps on our last mile delivery trucks. And that's worked. And the reason we did that is it was an asset light model, right? You didn't have a CapEx, you didn't have a hardware component that was too egregious from a financing perspective. And the reason we went away from the digital screens was twofold. One, there was the CapEx component that's, the venture community said, hey, you don't need 2 mil, you need 20 mil. This is a hardware company. You're going to need a lot of money to figure this out. And maybe if it was exciting enough, you could find a clever solution. There's clever financing things you can do to pull that off. The other one, which was more important, at least at launch, was budgets get allocated on a national basis, regional basis, and local basis. And so we weren't big enough to tap into any of the national budgets when we were at launch. When we were doing digital trucks, they were on these long haul trucks going from Chicago to Savannah, Georgia. So they weren't really in a specific region either. So we couldn't get those budgets. And then all that was left was those local budgets. To your question is, will we ever revisit it? So a few things. One, we now have nationwide scale. I think that's valuable. Two, we also know which assets are performant and which ones where an investment into that CapEx would actually make sense in a way that we didn't previously when we were, thinking about the digital business. And then the last thing is you do lose the cool behavioral psychology component, which I think is a key reason to believe for our existing product. However, I do think the future of out of home is going to be programmatically bought and sold, real-time bidding, just like people are accustomed to with digital. And so in terms of trying to position us for that wave, you and I joke about a program annual. It hasn't yet taken off and there's still probably a ways to go. I mean, that's the obvious conclusion. Look at the maturation arc of literally any other media channel. That's where it needs to end up. And so my thought is having digital solutions will set us up best for being able to tap into that demand when that transition starts to take off. Over what time scale will we make that transition? I'm not sure. And maybe there's a world where they coexist, but buying things on a static basis is going to be pretty hard to tap into any sort of programmatic buys if you don't have a digital solution, because then you can do it instantaneous in real time on the fly.
Yeah, and I just asked that question. If I'm a large company, I'm on both. I'm old school. I like the printed billboards and the vinyl and the wallscapes, and I also like the digital. So I think if my vision, if one day I go back into being CMO at a large company, is we're sort of going to do everything in out of home. We're going to do the tangible stuff, and we're going to do digital, and we're going to do drone shows, and we're going to kind of be everywhere in the real world. So
yeah.
Well, Tom, this has been awesome. One last question. So you're stuck in traffic behind one of your own trucks. What's a message that you would like to see that would, I guess, either make you smile, make you inspire marketers? What should it say?
All right, I'm gonna change your question a little bit, but it's gonna be one I think the audience will like. So Adgile, we have a creative best practices call before people start working on their creative for their Adgile campaign. And one thing that's in there is you got different advertising panels, right? You got sides and you got a rear. And we design them differently. And the reason for that is on the side panels, you're reaching mostly pedestrian traffic, people, walking about, going about their routine. And on the rear panel, you're advertising predominantly to vehicular traffic. So motorists, people in their vehicle. And so the side panels, the dwell times, 6 seconds or less. The rear panel is 6 to 30 seconds. And so I use an example to try to explain how and why people should design these panels differently. Let's take Amazon, largest private fleet owner in the entire world. They have the most financial exposure to truck side advertising. So if we were to take a page out of Amazon's book, and if you haven't noticed this, you'll now never forget it. What do they do on the side panels? Just the smiley face arrow. What do they do on the back panel? Smiley face arrow and then text at the very top. And it says, there's a whole truckload more to Amazon Prime. And
yeah, or things like everything and the kitchen sink. I've seen these. Actually, I remember them, which shows that it proves your point.
That's right. So people have, even the most mature operators in truck graphic worlds have realized and moved to exploit from a creative perspective that people engage with those panels fundamentally differently. So if I had to leave a message, I would say there's a whole truckload more to Adgile Media Group, and we'll have to save that for the second episode.
I love that, Tom. We will put links to Adgile and your LinkedIn in the episode description, but can you share where to go for people who are just listening to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn at Tom Shea. The company's Adgile Media Group. And then if you want to visit us or reach out to us on our website, we have a form that you can enter there. It's www.adgile.co. And yeah, would love to connect and see how we can be helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tom, for joining us. And for everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. We will see you next week.